Want to say thank you to everyone for coming for our third GrazeHERs session. I'm Leah Matsky. I'm with the Minnesota Grazing Lands Conservation Association. Today we're going to be talking about livestock nutrition and multi-species grazing. We have with us today Rachel Gray from Little Timber Farm, as well as Sabrina
Hi.
Florentino from the University of Minnesota Extension. And also, these two are upcoming field day hosts, with Sabrina in Sleepy Eye on June 11th and Rachel up in Black Duck on June 16th. So we'd really love to have you guys come join us on the farm in just a few weeks here. Before we get started, please keep your mics muted if possible. It just makes it easier to hear the presenters. Also, if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We'll be pausing mid-presentation to address those. With that, let's turn it over to Rachel.
Good morning, everybody. I put together a little PowerPoint about cattle nutrition, and the one thing you'll see stressed in here is I'm not a nutritionist. I'm a cow grower, actually a grass grower, and I use cattle to harvest that. So we always say here that our main crop is grass. So let's talk a little bit about that. And my focus is always on heifer development because that's what we do. So I'll tell you a little bit about our operation and then what we do. So when I share this screen, give me a second here. Let's see. All right, I think I have it. And sorry for the delay. There you go. Sabrina, can you give me a, thank you. That's what I was just going to ask for. All right. So again, I'm Rachel Gray, Little Timber Farms, and we focus on developing heifers. So what you see here is a group of heifers from last year. We droned a few just to kind of check our pastures and see what we have in those pastures and what we could see from the sky. So we are, now I have to figure out how to, there we go. We are a 5th generation ranch here. We purchase 400 to 500 F1 bald-bred Angus heifers every year. We select those heifers based on genetics, how old they are, phenotype. So we look at genotype and phenotype. We really believe that reproduction and, of course, nutrition is the single most important thing that you can pay attention to get a profitable cattle herd. Increasing that number of calves per dam will make your herd so much more efficient and profitable. In this market, of course, we're all looking at finally being a little profitable. We want to continue that. And when you can get your heifers and your cows to calve on time, your heifers to calve early, your cows to calve on time, of course, that's all of those things, efficiency and profitability. So how do we do that? In this market of super high prices, how do we get those heifers bred, get a calf on the ground and get bred back? As I stated, I believe in two things: really fertile genetics, great genetics, and proper development, which includes great nutrition. So some key considerations that I look at when I develop heifers, and you'll see that's pasture from last year. That's one that we grazed a little bit later. So there was good belly deep grass. We're not seeing that right now, but maybe we will. Key considerations is, number one, we need to ask ourselves, why is heifer development so important? We need to look at nutrition and development. What is a development plan? Fetal programming, and then longevity of the cow. So the genetics that you have this is the base for your herd. So when you look at your genetics and your cows, you're looking at the base for your whole herd. They need to be considered much like you would consider a bull. So that is so important to me, is looking at that maternal side. I've heard guys say, or people say, that really we pay so much attention to that bull, we need to be paying as much attention, if not more, to that cow. She is passing on, some say, more than 50% of the genetics. So those characteristics are really important. Are you going to purchase or develop heifers yourself? And that's where your plan is important. What are you going to do? Each has an advantage. Purchasing heifers offers new genetics, advantages of not having to have a heifer bull, not having to consider a separate pen, not having to spend money on an animal that won't produce for you right away. So that's one, reason that I hear that people purchase heifers. Also retaining heifers. When you retain, you also see advantages. You see them grow up, the cow family, that they already fit your environment. So that brings me to, and I'm going to skip over nutrition for a little bit because we're going to talk a lot about that, but I'm going to talk a little bit about a development plan. Develop them with the cows versus separately. There's something to be said for both things. The research I've done and what we did here, we learned it when we had our cow-calf herd, and then we also really backed up with some good studies from South Dakota State University that said, while there's value in putting that heifer just out with your cows to be developed at the same time, really, we should develop them separately. They have a different nutrition level they need. They have a different plane of nutrition. Overall, 19% better conception if you develop your heifers separately from your cows and you concentrate on their nutrition. The argument against that is someone says, well, I would not want that 19% in my cow herd because they're not going to function like my cows. They're going to fall out. And so there's both sides of that coin. I am a proponent of deciding what works for you. If you have pen space to develop those heifers on their own, we can really focus on that nutrition and making a heifer that is in your herd for a long time. Again, I'm not a nutritionist, but I will say in this business, I do a lot with heifer development nutrition. We have a nutritionist hired that comes to the farm and meets with me, looks at our body condition score, looks at our rations. I meet with him more in the winter than I do in the summer. So that's really when I utilize him. In the summer, our nutrition is really taken care of by what we've planted in the field and what we're seeing come up and where we're moving these cattle. So following along in my notes here. I think we've all heard, and I cannot stress it as enough, that what is happening in the cow is happening to your herd. What that means is, well, that heifer is developing. She hopefully has a calf in utero, and that is affecting this cow, and not only this cow, but the next generation and the following generation. I always find it fascinating that when a female develops in utero, whether it's cattle or people, they have, by the time they're born, 100% of the eggs that they will ever have. So what happens to that heifer, what we're doing nutritionally to that heifer, is also happening to that calf. And we really saw that when we purchased some calves that were in utero during a really bad drought out west. Those calves that we purchased, the heifer calves, really never performed as well as their counterparts from the previous years that had not been in utero in drought. We buy heifers from the same ranch every year, so I see the same genetics, I see the same cattle, I see, basically sisters of what we're getting. And that year when we bought calves that had been in utero in drought, and I'm not the ones raised in the drought, but the ones that were in utero, they did not perform as well as their counterparts had in the past. And we really believe that was a result of fetal programming and nutrition in the cow side. In fact, those heifers, as I've followed along on their journey on other ranches, a lot of those heifers have fallen out. And we've talked to the ranchers about, hey, we think this is what happened. We're working on that. So we've made the decision that if there's a bad drought, we probably back off on heifers that we buy from drought areas for that reason. So let's talk about it. Heifer nutrition. Vaccinations and nutrition go hand in hand. I believe that your nutrition protocols and your vaccination protocols both have to be dialed in. So what are we doing for that? Obviously, you need a vet and you need a nutritionist. If you don't have those two things, get them. We believe in making sure that we are using a modified live vaccine on heifers 2 times before we breed. Make sure that your worming protocol is up to par. And not only pay attention to the vaccine, but really pay attention to when you need to be giving those boosters. If it says give them 3 weeks after, give that booster 3 weeks after. Don't try to stretch that out, especially on heifers in your development pens. One thing I'm concerned about in northern Minnesota when I talk about vaccinations, nutrition, and worming is the lack of valbazen. It's going to affect all of us. Especially here in northern Minnesota, we have a massive population of white-tailed deer, and we are really worried about how that will affect our heifers because we don't have the fluticide that we need now that we can't get the valbazen. So trying to figure out what to do with that. We do have a little reserve here that we keep for our bulls. We are fenced out of all surface water because it's not the cattle fluke that's giving us trouble, it is the deer fluke. So we really are trying to separate those white-tailed deer from our cattle, which up here in the North Woods is pretty impossible. So remember to use what you have to build your program. My nutrition plan looks much different than anyone else's because of what we can grow, because of where we are, the winters, those kinds of things. So use what you have. Heifers, I believe, need to be at 60 to 65% of their mature cow weight when you breed. You will have some outliers that breed and they're much smaller. You have some outliers that breed and they're much bigger. But we usually target that 65%. We want that heifer to be weighing that 65% of her mature cow weight. So if you looked at my herd right now, you would see, and I'm going to use some ranch names just because that's how I categorize them. You would see a Richter heifer is slightly smaller right now going into breeding season than a Ruland heifer. And I've been in those cow herds and I know that those mature cow weights are drastically different. And we kind of have a cow for everybody. We have guys that want really big cows. We have some people that want smaller cows. And so we keep all of that in stock essentially. So you'll see heifers that might weigh 700 pounds. And I've got a group that probably are pushing 900 because that will be correlated back to their mature cow weights. We need to increase that plane of nutrition and push them as they get close to breeding and are bred. So what we do is we start really we call it low and slow. Think of cooking a brisket or something on the grill for a long time. We start with that low and slow when they come in. We transition them to a haylage or a silage, adding in our grain ration, which remember, we're using what we have to build our program, and we can grow good barley here. We can grow silage corn, we can grow haylage. So our ration is based on essentially those things. And then adding in some dry distillers as needed to adjust the proteins. But we start very light on those things. And our other key is we believe that along with nutrition should come exercise. We don't dry lot cattle a lot. We might, if it's coming up to breeding season, and we have mud everywhere, we need to get some pens utilized for breeding groups, we might that. But otherwise, as you see in the bottom picture, they are out on pasture all winter long. We have wind breaks, we do good bedding. And I will say that bale laying there didn't have its twine cut because I walked away from it. I always take the twine off. And I say that about that picture because so many times we see bale with either twine or net wrap, and I think it's important we get that off there. So anyway, good plane of nutrition. We start them kind of low and slow and then push them. We start the push usually around the middle of January. We will go through our rations. We'll kind of ramp it up, both with calories and with protein. We'll increase the calories, we'll increase the protein, and just push them. We're looking for a May 12th, 13th, and 14th breed. That's when we AI. So we do, this year we did 600 heifers over about a 2.5 day period. So we kind of get that level of nutrition and we get them right there and then just take off. So we have a plan. Having a good plan is key. I don't believe that herd nutrition and herd health is something that you can just kind of randomly do. We have our plans written down. They're in our book. They're on our computer. They're also in our break room, vet room, whatever we call it, on a board, so that all the guys that work here, all the people that work here are able to read that plan. They know exactly how much food goes in that mixer, how much haylage, how much corn silage, and so everybody's doing it the same way. So having that plan is key. And again, how you develop these heifers really have a lasting effect on your herd. As far as gain, people ask us what we want for gain. We shoot for about 1.5 pounds a day. Having had the same heifers from the same ranches for a few years, I know that some will hit that mark of 1.5 pounds and others will exceed that without me really trying. There's some that I know that are probably gaining 2.5 a day, but they just have a little bit bigger frame. They need that weight. And they go into a different side of the breeding program as far as what we're breeding them to and what we're asking them to do, and where they're going in the end, because all of these heifers are being sold somewhere. So those larger framed heifers are going to go into a program with heifers that are bred Charolais. So they're going to carry Charolais calves and go out west with those calves. So we know that. We're shooting to feed roughly about 3% of their body weight. And we try to keep that ration at about a 16% protein until we start the ramp up. Then we're going to try to feed a little more percent of their body weight, maybe 3.5%, and we're going to increase that protein. We're also going to increase that energy as we do that. So we're really kind of pushing that. We don't want them to get too fat too fast, as that can really affect their mammary glands, and excess fat in udders and places like that can really affect the cow. And that's where that longevity of the cow comes in. If we overfeed a heifer, if you're seeing a heifer and she's kind of roly-poly and you're seeing a little fat deposits in that udder, you're really going to sacrifice milk production later on. So we try to pay attention to that too. Again, starting slow, pushing them as we need to, keeping things consistent. That's another part of our program. And we breed heifers, we try to keep things the same. Nutritionally, the same breeding groups. I call them their friend groups, because cattle will typically eat within 2 feet of the other heifers they get along with. And so really when they're in their friend groups, they feel comfortable, they feel safe, we feel like we get better breed up. So trying to keep all of that the same throughout that AI breeding season. We typically don't go to pasture until now. We went yesterday to pasture. We kept them in their same areas that they had been in with their same breeding groups until roughly 15 to 20 days after AI breeding. So yesterday was turnout day for them. Let's see. Summer nutrition is much winter nutrition, obviously. Summer nutrition is kind of self-explanatory. We are planting our fields so that the cows are getting a mouthful of what they need in every bite. So let's talk about that. We base our summer nutrition program off of rotational grazing. We plant each pasture to provide variety. So what you see on your screen here, and I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, what you see on the screen here is something called pasture maps. These are the main pastures on my farm. They're not all the pastures, but they're the main pastures that we rotate through. There's another group off probably about 3 miles away from this that you can't see, and it's roughly about this big. So what you see in PastureMap is I have some things marked. This little icon here tells me there's a herd grazing there, one here, and 2 up here. So right now on this map, it's showing me five herds grazing in different units. What this one is also showing is that I just moved out of this unit and this unit because they're showing 0 days. And PastureMap is great because it tells me how many days rest something has had. It also flags things that have had a lot of rest. This is where I had worked up a pasture, I had replanted a pasture, and that I did roughly 163 days ago. And so we didn't go to this pasture at all in the fall or end of summer to fall because we kind of rehabbed this pasture. The waters that you see marked are permanent water sources, so we can go there in the winter. And this is the area that I measure my rainfall from, just because it's kind of in the center of the farm. So it picks that up for me. This is really a great tool that we use for summer nutrition. When we plant pastures, we put the pasture mix in. We will use things like a creeping alfalfa, timothy, orchard grass, adding some clover to that, oftentimes putting in some oats or rye so that they really have a variety. We'll also use a few turnips and radishes. So when we come back to graze, there's all a variety in the pastures, and that's the key. Forage testing and manure testing is also so important. A couple times a summer, I'll take forage clippings because I want to know what's in that ground. What am I actually feeding these animals? And then also testing that manure. I think it's important to know what we're putting in and what we're getting back. So we do that. Mineral is huge. If you don't have a mineral that you believe in, that you're finding is working for you, I would encourage you to find a good mineral rep that's knowledgeable and maybe ask your nutritionist what they think. We have a custom mineral developed for us because we had some deficiencies and we were looking at, well, we need maybe increased vitamin A, increased vitamin D, and some E for our breeding program. So we have a custom heifer mineral developed for us. And we can call and change that at the drop of a hat. They're very, very good. They'll change it. I could change it every single ton if I wanted to. That gets a little bit cumbersome, but we can make that change really often. So the goal here is to get the cattle a variety of forage in every single mouthful, maintain healthy soil, healthy pastures, and increase your productivity and get those calves gaining weight. Let's see. Drought, disaster, and death. It happens to all of us. So my takeaway, if you do one thing, is to make a plan and make a plan about how you're going to handle this. I went into 2021 and I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a good nutrition plan. I didn't have a drought plan, didn't have a disaster plan, and we got hit hard. This picture is very poignant for me because that is taken in 2021. We were feeding wheat midlands there. We're not prepared to feed wheat midland. That was a cube that I believe it was Foremost was making for drought areas in Minnesota. And we said, well, this could save us. The protein is there. There's some fiber. It's what we need. How do we feed this? We didn't have a cake container for the back of a truck like they do out west. We didn't have that. So the best we could come up with was dump a ton at a time into an old manure spreader and disconnect the beaters in the back. And the chain just took that out at the end. My uncle is back there trying to see if it was working. And he was through all of that with me. He was a great source of help and things like that. And he was instrumental in helping me figure that out in 21. My dad is here with me. My uncle was here. He happened to have just passed away in March of ALS. And so that's why I say make a plan for drought, disaster, and death. His death also showed me that you need a plan for that because he had been involved in the farm and things like that. And thankfully he was a very good planner. And so protected his land and protected what he was doing for the land. So that's my take is I can't stress enough how important a plan is. Make that drought plan early if you're seeing drought. Talk through all the hard what ifs. What are we going to do for nutrition? Can we get a cube made? Will Famo or Foremost, I honestly can't remember who made it. Will they make a cube for us that has the protein that we need so we can get through this. In the end, we ended up taking all those cattle you see here, plus about 400 more, and shipping them south to Chatfield, Minnesota. And I had to book a feedlot for a year. So we were out of northern Minnesota and into a feedlot in Chatfield. I booked them for a year. I can tell you exactly that that is a $237,000 expense that you don't want. And that's what that drought was. We have a better plan now, but we needed to stay in business. So at the time we were scrambling, and that's what we did. Now we have a better plan. We turn bulls out a little bit earlier when we see it's dry. We make a plan to get heifers gone sooner, and those kinds of things. So make a plan that works for you. Little bit about technology and nutrition. Don't be afraid to use technology. It's fantastic. You can track your feed consumption. As you can see, I can track where my cattle are going, what pasture they've been to, what they've eaten. Do your soil sampling, do your manure testing, and do your forage testing. That gives you a whole picture of what you're actually feeding that cow and what that cow is taking in and putting out. And make sure you're utilizing that manure, especially in this environment where we don't have, we don't have the funds to go around all the time, and fertilizer is extremely expensive right now. So we have cut our fertilizer costs astronomically. Last year we tried 2 fields of corn, silage corn, where we had no commercial fertilizer, and we ran 191 bushels an acre, which if you're down south, that doesn't sound like much, but in northern Minnesota, that's a lot. And we did it with no fertilizer. We had only manure on those fields. So utilizing that manure and really seeing what's in that manure is so important. So quick pictures of our working facilities. This is my brother, he's our vet. We went with this chute. We think it keeps cattle safe and quiet, and we utilize EID systems, keeps track of weights, lets me know my nutrition is working. Are my heifers gaining weight? That kind of thing. All right, questions? And that is my contact information and my super cute grandkids. So, all right, let's see. I'm looking at the chat quick. It says, do you ever do 100% grass fed? No, we do not. We find you can do that. I think you would maybe need, here, I have to supplement so much in the winter. Our winters get really rough really fast. And I know you can. I know I could feed hay through the winter. We do stockpile and we will let them graze. But we just don't do it. We have to grow corn. It's a cheap feed, and we use that to supplement as energy. We get our protein from our hay and our alfalfa. We're really, when we chop our hay, we're looking at dairy quality hay that we're feeding, and then we're kind of essentially cutting that with our corn silage for energy with these heifers, but we don't do 100% grass fed. Have you ever tested your grass for quality and modulate your rations based on that? Yes, our hay is all tested and rations are based on that. Our silage is tested. I think we test silage every 3 weeks to change rations in the winter. Honestly, I don't know when they come to pull silage rations, because I might be in the barn or in the office or somewhere else, and the nutritionist will send his guy and they pull they pull the samples from the hay that we're in, the row that we're in, where we're at in the silage pile, and we're looking for things like vomitoxins, we're looking for nutritional items. So we're constantly testing. And then we also test our grass. We test early season, mid-season, and late season as far as what our grass nutrition is. And sometimes if we have a field that's, boy, it's showing up that it maybe isn't as nutritious as it needs to be, we'll go through, no-till some other species into that, maybe fertilize. We use Centris Soda Co-op, which is a technical service provider, and we utilize them a lot for infiltration tests, just all kinds of things. Looking at the soil, how do we make this grass more nutritious? So that's what we do. But as far as the testing, sometimes I don't even know when they pull it. I'll just get a new ration that pops up on the computer. We don't, we don't supplemental feed on top of our pastures at all. We only graze. So if we're in the summer, we're not supplementing at all with proteins. We find our grasses have enough protein and nutrition in them because of the variety that they have. So the only thing out when we're on pasture is the salt mineral. So we're not supplementing any protein. We don't supplement hay unless we are going into a drought. Then we will pick a sacrifice pasture and we'll keep everything there and feed. The question is, what are key things to look at when heifers selecting them for a breeding program? And the main thing that have made us cull. First of all, Samantha, or Sabrina, am I taking too much time? Am I okay here?
You're okay. Just keep answering the questions.
So when I look for a heifer breeding program, a heifer has to be born early. So if a producer calls me and says, hey, I might have some heifers that qualify, I guess I should back up. The first thing is genetics. They have to be, if I'm looking for a Baldy, they have to be out of a Vermilion or an Ellingson Angus cow. So we've kind of put that parameter on, or similar. I will look at similar genetics, but they have to be those kind of quality genetics. Next, they have to be out of a Hereford bull. I like Top Hereford out of Carrington, North Dakota, or I like Van Newkirk Herefords. And the reason I've chosen those larger breeders, they've got a lot of data behind them, and they really fit with those two cow herds. We just know that from trial and experience, and I like working with those guys. You wouldn't get better than those four gentlemen running those businesses, and they're very easy to work with. They'll put me in touch with producers. I can get bull lists. So genetics is huge for me, looking at those genetics that perform well together. The next thing I look at is temperament. I don't want the wild. I've got those two grandkids here, and one that was just born and another one on the way. So I need nice, calm cattle. They obviously don't have to be pets. We're talking West River cattle. So if you know that, they are usually born west of the Missouri River. They're born in tough country. They're rangy. But at the same time, they have to be docile and calm down when we bring them to Minnesota. The next thing I would do, so I call if they're wild. If they're wild and they come off the truck wild and they stay that way, they're gone. They don't even get to the pre-breeding exam. We do a full pre-breeding exam on every single heifer. That means she gets an ultrasound. She comes in, she gets an ultrasound. We look for V-shaped pelvises, tipped pelvises. We look at her udder structure. Even as a calf, you can see that. If we see, boy, that one really looks bad, we look at feet while they're in the chute. So we take that whole picture, docility, udder, feet, and then the internal picture. We look really hard. Are they cycling? Is the reproductive tract good? Is it feel healthy? Does she have two working ovaries? You'd be surprised at the number of cattle we find that maybe only have one ovary, or they have a real normal size pelvis on the top and the bottom is like completely V-shaped. We find all kinds of problems in heifers when we do that initial ultrasound. And we do that a month and a half before breeding. We also score them if they've already been cycling. Essentially, they're a 5. If they're too immature, they're a 1 or a 0, and they get kicked out and sold. And I just sell those as feeder heifers to somebody. So those are the main things: feet, udders, temperament, and then that internal structure. We also do some DNA testing for people that really give them a good result of what their heifers are looking like. In our program, we have the capability to trace that heifer back to the cow she was born with or born from on the ranch. And once I give DNA tests back to the gentleman that the heifer came from, they will often cull a cow that's not producing. So we've really tightened up those ranches too. And they run between 600 and 2,000 head. So that's what I'm buying out of. So I have a guy that I buy 200 purebred Black Angus heifers. He's got 2,000 cows. So I'm taking 200 of his best heifers. We give him that data back, and he culls cows based on our data that we give back, both the DNA test and that pre-breeding exam. So the software that I use is called PastureMaps. It's called, I think it's by Grassroots Carbon. And yeah, that's what we do. I will say PastureMaps is a little expensive. It runs me about $70 a month, which is an expense, but it keeps so much of my data in there, and flags like when I have to move heifers. So, all right, that is all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. Let's see. Can you see my slides? Can anyone confirm that you can see my slides? Yep. Okay. Perfect. Well, thanks so much, Rachel, for really a good overview of nutrition and reproduction and really having a plan. So as mentioned, I'm Sabrina Florentino. I am Alternative Livestock Systems Extension Educator here at the University of Minnesota. Grew up on a dairy farm in southern Minnesota. Thought I'd work with dairy cattle my whole life. I've learned that the things you say you'll never do are the exact things you will do. So now we have diversified and raise sheep as well as beef cattle. And, initially that was due to the need to diversify and, sell out the dairy herd. But since then, we've learned a lot and seen the benefits of having multiple species on the farm. So if you find yourself in a similar situation or know more than me and already understood all the benefits that there are to have multiple species, great. This presentation was developed for more of like an hour long, so I'm going to zoom through some pieces, but just ask your questions as we go, and that will help us, dial in on what you're interested in. So we will take the little overview of the historical context of multiple herbivores on the landscape. What might our goals be when we're grazing multiple species? The physiological differences of those different species and how that plays into their foraging preferences. Then logistics of how do we actually manage multiple species and some of the benefits and challenges of doing so. So if we think back to a historical context of many of our landscapes and or a current context of some of our more native ranges, whether it's in the Serengeti of Africa or the Great Plains of North America, these ecosystems have evolved or co-evolved with multiple different species of herbivores, both large and small, and that really lends itself to the ecosystems that we have. There's not a whole ton of research on multiple species grazing together, and that just is, I think, simply due to the fact of the complexity of those systems, and really that becomes a headache when it comes to research. But John Walker, who has done a lot of the research, points out in one of his publications that as the sheep production declined in the West, that was correlated with an increase in our weeds that we see out there, a lot of our problems like leafy spurge and spotted knapweed, those types of things. This is just a correlation. Of course, we can't prove causation maybe, and there's many factors in there, but just sort of highlights the importance of multiple different livestock and or wildlife species on the landscape and keeping our plant communities in line. So what is the goal of multi-species grazing? We're generally thinking about greater production on the same piece of land. So doesn't matter really which species you're combining, whether it's goats and sheep or cattle and sheep or what have you, horses even, you are trying to find that balance of two species being produced on the same land, and then those synergies that exist between them actually leading to a greater, pounds per acre than if either of those species was being raised separately. But to be truly successful when we are doing this, we want our ecosystem stability to be maintained and or improved with the addition of that new livestock species. And by ecosystem stability, we're talking about things like soil health or nutrient cycling, the welfare of the animals themselves, the biodiversity of the ecosystem, especially of our plant stands, our pasture swords. We want to make sure that none of those things are going backwards, that we're actually improving those systems, and that will really come down to the ratios of species that we have on our land, and of course the way that we manage them. So with all those factors combined, we're hoping then that our pasture productivity will increase actually with having multiple species on impacting that land. So those are the goal we're aiming for. And if we don't have all those pieces in line, then we are really doing a disservice maybe to our land, or we're doing a disservice to our livestock, or to the profitability of our farm. So many things to keep in balance. And the reason this, works is because our livestock species are filling particular niches within the landscape. So I hope you can see this video, but this was really early on when we added sheep to the system. We were lambing at this period of time, so our paddocks were larger than normal to give them space for that process. And inadvertently, then our sheep really just focused on one part of the paddock, and that would be where the dandelions were, and they pretty much stayed there the entirety of the time they were in this paddock. But thankfully we had, whoops, I went too fast. The end of the video is that we had our dairy heifers follow behind them and really take care of that stand of grass that the sheep weren't touching at that point in time. So they have niches that they can fill. And thinking about grazing, maybe taking a step back, looking at the physiology of our different livestock species, you can see are very simple. On the left, our poultry or avian species, more simple digestive system. Our pigs or monogastrics, similar digestive system to ourselves. Those type of livestock, because it is more simple, require really higher quality nutrition or more readily available nutrients. And so they're going to be fed things like concentrates and grains and oil seeds. And those are going to make up the majority of their diet. Whereas the ruminant has, as you can see, the 4-compartment stomach there, which is only one piece of their digestive system. But the complexity of the ruminants' 4-compartment stomach is really what allows them to digest all this forage. This is why we're talking about grazing. And the rumen fermentation vat, is a place where there's millions of microbes that allow that animal to break down fiber and get nutrients from it. And even the dairy cow gets like 50% of her protein just from dead microbes from the rumen. So really a complex and amazing system that allows us to graze our ruminants, our sheep, our goats, our cattle. But there are differences even within our sheep, our goats, and our cattle. Mainly in size of different parts of the digestive system, but also of, their muzzle and the way that they graze. All of those things play a factor into their foraging preferences. And these are two graphs that show basically the same information. Maybe one is easier or appeals better to you than the other, but these are averages. So we have our different classes of plants. We have grass, we have forbs, which would be our more broadleaf plants, things like weeds or legumes, those types of plants. And then we have browsing, so our woody species, our shrubs, our bushes, or things like that. But in general, our cattle are going to prefer more grass, lesser amounts of forbs and woody species. Not to say they won't eat those. Our sheep are more in the middle, still preferring majority grass, but eating more of our forbs. And as you saw in that video, things like dandelions, but they will also, nibble on trees and bushes and shrubs as well. And our goats really are more our heavy browsers. Closer to 60% of their diet can come from browsing. And then I left our pigs and our poultry outside of that because even though they will forage, the majority of their diet is coming from something with higher nutrition, like our grains or oil seeds. I'll just briefly go over this, but you can see our goats are in the middle there with our intermediate feeders. Um, and then our sheep are our temperate grazers, but depending on the context, so depending on where you're located, depending on what forage is available, the sheep might become more like goats and eating more brush. Our cattle will mostly stay down in the temperate grazing section, though, and really prefer higher amounts of grass. And this is really due to, again, their muzzles, the way that they graze. So if you think of a cow, they stick their tongue out and grab a bunch of grass and bite it off. They don't really have the ability to select specific species of plants as well, or specific parts of plants. So like our sheep and our goats, they have a split upper lip, a smaller muzzle. They can climb. They're more agile. They can really focus in on the really high quality parts of a plant, which means, a goat that's browsing, you might think that really is lower quality forage, but they're focusing in on the leaves, the berries. They can really get to the highs of that plant. And because they are smaller, um, as in like their rumen capacity is less, they really have to get the higher quality forages right away before they have filled up their rumen and can't get the nutrition that they need. Whereas cattle really have lots of space to eat large amounts of forage and digest that and get nutrition from it. I said I wouldn't spend much time, but that was a bit. So, of course, there's differences in their topographical preferences as well. As we already mentioned, that sheep and goats are more agile. They can, climb hills better. They'll actually prefer the upland pieces of a landscape. And we just need to be careful in managing these different species that they aren't over impacting the places that they prefer as well. So these foraging preferences are just an average. Again, as I sort of alluded already, depending on your context, depending on the forage that's available, depending on the time of the year, those proportions can change. And this is just really to drive that point home. This is a study of dairy cattle in Italy, and just a really short time period, 2 months, July to August. So each black rectangle is another time point of sampling. So basically like 2 weeks in between each, and you can see the different colors, the different species of plant, how much portions vary even over a short time period. So there are averages, but our livestock are flexible and those things will change as our context changes. So that's a little background on, the theory behind why we would, or why different species might work together because they have different preferences. Now, how do we get them on the landscape? The first thing I would suggest is to take stock of your farm, of the forage that you have available, and based on that, what livestock might be suited to that scenario. So if you do have, encroaching brush or woodier areas, maybe goats would be a good option, or maybe you just have pretty typical improved pasture situation, then maybe you're looking more at your cattle and your sheep. But in any case, if you're already having problems with enough available for grazing situations, adding a different species is not going to fix that. So if you're in a scenario like that, adding another species only would help possibly if you're also culling whatever species you already have, or balancing that out. So that's just all to say, like, know how to calculate or estimate what appropriate stocking densities or carrying capacities for your land. And the next is really into depth about that, so I won't go much farther than that, but just pay attention to that zoom, and hopefully that will give you some tools to really understand how many of any species should really be on the land and the forage production that you have. So what are some rules of thumb when we're combining in this scenario? Well, sheep and cattle mostly is what we will discuss, but research has shown that cattle is pretty reasonable without affecting cattle performance or pasture condition. So if you have 10 cattle, you could possibly add 10 ewes as well. That again is very dependent on your landscape, your forage production, your weather, your climate, but general rule of thumb that has been successful in research at least. So you could do 1 per 1, or say you have 10 cattle, 10, or 5 of those cattle, then for every cow you get rid of, you could replace it with 5 sheep or 6 goats. But again, thinking about the context here, this table is showing us that how many sheep in this case you can replace with 1 cow is dependent on that forage stand. So how much plant diversity is there, and therefore how much do the dietary preferences of the sheep. So if there's only an overlap of 25%, that means we have pretty diverse pastures. There's plenty of like different forbs and things for the sheep to eat that the cattle maybe are less so going to eat, and plenty of grass for the cattle. That means we can actually replace more ewes per each cow that we're getting rid of. If there's a greater overlap in dietary preferences, so like 75%, we're not as diverse, that we can't replace as many ewes per cow. This relationship, like when it comes to additional production or performance of our livestock, is not symmetrical. So what I mean by that is if we have a steer that we're replacing with lambs, so we get rid of 1 steer, we add 4 lambs to our flock or herd, that 4 lambs lamb performance and steer performance either. But if we add 10 lambs, we could add up to 10 lambs and still not affect the steer performance. But at that point, we might be, growing our sheep slower, growing our lambs slower. So depending on your priorities and of course what the land can handle, there are different levels at which one species might be more affected than the other in combining the two. Talked really in depth about the importance of livestock nutrition, and that carries through in our multi-species scenarios as well. So, know your nutritionists, work with them. Hopefully they can work with multiple species if that's what you're aiming for. The classic example is that sheep require much less copper than cattle. So like with that example, we're thinking about how do we offer mineral to both of these species. Well, you could run your 2 different species separately, so they're in different paddocks, and in that way, you're meeting their nutrient requirements by providing different mineral to each of them. But if they are being ran together, how will you ensure that both species requirements are being met and you're avoiding any toxicity concerns? Also keep that in mind when you're working with like pastured poultry or pastured pigs, that those ruminants can't access their concentrate feed, or the pig's feed, because it might have higher levels of certain minerals than what our sheep or cattle need. So keeping those pieces in mind with the infrastructure that you may need to run multiple species. Speaking of infrastructure, our sheep and goats will require generally much more intensive fencing to keep them in. So you can see some netting fencing here for our sheep and goats that are combined in this. You might use multiple strands of polywire. The key is always to have them trained to whichever system you're using. Even your cattle, if they're not used to electric fence, you're going to have issues trying to keep them in. So training is really important. Our small ruminants have a greater predator pressure. Also dependent on where you live, what those predators look like, but consider whether you might need a mini donkey, a livestock guardian dog, in the addition of some small ruminants to your farm. If you're in the opposite scenario, wanting to add cattle, they need lots of space. They need 10 times the space of our small ruminants. This is especially important in the winter if you're doing any confinement of animals, and when we're not grazing, and even when we're grazing, keep that space requirement and additional forage requirement in mind for larger species. Here you can see that this was our initial purchase of ewes with a few steers and dairy steers. They were trained well to just 2 poly-wire fences, and they were moved through this annual crop in midsummer with no issue. We thought we could continue that later, but when you add in lambs into the scenario, who can go where they want, that great plan is foiled. So mostly we use netting fences these days, and maybe once lambs are older, you can get back to the polywire and get them trained. And the only reason I say that is because netting fence can take a lot of labor and time, and polywire can help reduce some of that. So you saw there sort of an example of a flirt. Currently, we run our cattle separately. They're not together, other than there are some rams with the cows right now. But there are advantages of running them together, and the research has shown that. So they tested bonding pen-weaned lambs with 8 to 9-month-old heifers for 30 days, and there were advantages in predation. So there was no predation loss with our bonded lambs, whereas the unbonded lambs had a predation loss of about 1 lamb for every 5 days of the study. They found that the bond can happen in as little as 14 days, but you really have to be observant for abusive behaviors. You could also try field bonding, where you bond wethers initially with some cattle and then add ewes in gradually and observe as that process is happening. But in general, if you always move the sheep toward the cattle, that can help with bonding, starting with the youngest animals. In the study, they mentioned that small ruminants could be contained with cattle fencing once they were bonded. Either we didn't bond some of our animals well, which is probably the case, but we did not find it to be the case that they would be kept in with the cattle fencing. So our rams that hang out with the cows basically could go wherever they really wanted, because, I mean, the perimeter fence keeps them in, but in our individual paddocks, they just pretty much they play with the cows. So depending on how particular you want to be about your intensive grazing management, that may or may not be the case that they can be contained with cattle fencing. So our benefits of multi-species grazing really go back to those foraging preferences that we noted, that each species differs, and that can lend itself to increasing the diversity of your plant sward. So with plants back all to the similar stage of growth, which allows for less competition between species of plants and therefore more diverse pastures. So for example, if you're hitting one plant species really hard, its regrowth will be more difficult than one that the cattle or sheep didn't touch. And the species that wasn't grazed super hard might take over. All of that benefit will be realized, though, with intentional management of those different livestock species. So this is sort of reviewing what I said, but they eat different things. They also have different hoof action. They have different manure. Think of sheep poop versus cow poop. It's spread differently across the land and can really have benefits for our ecosystem. If you think, like I said, that there's a variety of species that are being impacted instead of maybe one more so than the other. When it comes to plant species, we will end up with a more resilient plant stand that is producing hopefully throughout the season, and more resilient in different weather situations when we have this varied impact. The benefits that we can realize are also, though, dependent on our starting context of how diverse it was in the like an improved pasture on the left with our traditional pasture species. There's not too many diverse different forage species or structures in there. We will see benefits with multi-species grazing, but they won't be as like dramatic as we would see in a more diverse system on the right, where we already have brush encroaching on spaces or quite a varied amount of different classes of plants. Our multi-species grazing will have really great impacts in those situations. So I know we're at time now, but like our goals mentioned, we're looking for increased amount of pounds per acre than if these species were raised separately. And this was just one study showing that the top bar is gain per day of sheep alone versus gain per day of the lambs. With cattle on the bottom three scenarios, they were all combined with cattle and had greater daily gains in those scenarios. So research has shown that we have 20 to 25% greater productivity for our cattle than when combined than when they are raised separately. 8 to 9% greater productivity for sheep when combined than compared to raised separately. All these increases are due to some of the benefits I've already mentioned. I'm just going to keep moving here. Having multiple species can really help with our parasite loads because not all parasites are, or our cattle and our sheep aren't hosts for all parasites. So there are some parasites that only sheep will be infected with, and so when the cattle we graze behind them, they can be sort of that dead stop that when they ingest the infective stage of the larva, it won't be reshed. But that is not the only thing we should have in our toolbox for our parasite management, because that is not the case for all parasites. There are parasites that are shared between the two as well. Know what your poisonous plants are, whether you have multi-species or single species grazing. That is very important, but when you add in another species, just be aware that some plants are more poisonous to, say, a cow than they are to a sheep, and vice versa. So do your research before adding in another species. So there are benefits to grazing multiple species. There are also challenges. I've mentioned a few already, thinking about additional fencing, the labor that's required. It's a steep learning curve for a new species, at least it was in my situation with our sheep. I'm learning every day, learning constantly more about this new species, even about our beef cattle that are so different than our dairy cattle. Think through water points. Not all species can drink from the same trough. More animals really just means more liability for animals to get out, but that circles back to having a good fencing plan. If you're not used to small ruminants, that parasite learning curve might be large as well. They have very different animal behaviors. If you try sorting a sheep out from the flock compared to a cow, my experience is much more difficult. So having a plan for working sheep versus cattle and what sort of infrastructure you might need for that. And diversification, it can be good, but it can also propose or present challenges for marketing those products. Make sure you have a plan that there is actually an avenue for profitability in adding these additional species. These multiple species can be a risk, especially in the disease transfer arena. So we have diseases that can be transmitted across species. You don't need to memorize this, but just be aware. And there's, of course, pathogens that affect multiple species. We also have risks from diseases with high mutation rates. So things like small ruminant lentivirus and avian influenza, when we have multiple possible hosts in the same vicinity that can speed up these mutations, and these can also be of concern when they also are affecting the human population. So just knowing this isn't a presentation about biosecurity, but it is so important whether you have single or multiple species. And then really when you're adding in another species, knowing whether a certain disease infects this new species, and or are they an intermediate host, so as in they carry it but they don't have clinical signs, and then which species are clinically susceptible. So doing your research on that is very important. Good biosecurity is important in any scenario. When it comes down to it, deciding whether to have multiple species on your farm or not is all about balancing risk and reward. There can be really great benefits to our ecosystem, to our pastures, to the just general diversity on the landscape, but is it right for your context, both your geographical and climatic context, but also your family, your business goals, etc. I won't say much about this, but this is a wonderful book if you haven't read it yet. That does get into the multi-species topic quite a bit, but really just about livestock nutrition, human nutrition, and animal behavior, and how all those things are interconnected. So there's my contact info. I see there's some things in the chat. I'll check that now, and we hope to see you at one of our field days. Doo-doo-doo. I'll stop sharing so I can look at the chat here. Is there parasite load consideration? There's definitely a consideration for parasite load. I'm not sure which direction you are going with that, but as I mentioned, if you're we're concerned about parasites in cattle too, but small ruminants can be it's more dramatic, I guess, and more of a concern are parasite levels. So in or moving towards, really having a plan is important. If you want to learn more about that, please come to our Southern Field Day. We'll have a whole talk with Dr. Angie Varnum about parasites and creating a basically integrated pest management plan for parasites and our livestock. Are there studies showing how nutrient profiles of scat manure are different between species? If they aim forage, would they have the same end result? There are plenty of studies about manure. I don't know if that particular context there is one, but I'll be happy to look and let you know, Alex. I would suspect that the end result would be different, even if they're eating the same. And the nourishment book actually might talk about that. I just haven't read it recently. Is asking where the study was conducted. I'm not sure which study she was asking about, but most of the studies on this topic have happened in Texas and North Dakota, so less so in, Minnesota or Midwest area. And with that, are there further questions or anything else from Leah?
No, thank you so much. I just want to encourage all of you guys to join us next Tuesday, June 2nd. We're going to be doing GrazeHERs math and stocking rates, as well as talking about the equip program opportunities with Sabrina Clays and Kelly Anderson. Also, if you haven't done so already, please register for one of our in-person field days. I know I'm particularly excited about the parasite management you just brought up, Sabrina, at your farm. We really have struggled with sheep and at our farm on that as well. So should be excellent information. We're going to have bison burgers at Sabrina's farm and build your own burger up at Rachel's place, and really encourage you to join us for good food and great company. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sabrina and Rachel, for your time, and we'll see you next time. Sabrina, do you want to go ahead and make me the host again?